Now, the very next time this happens, said a gruff and suspicious voice, I shall be exceedingly angry. Who is it this time disturbing people on such a night?
"Oh, Badger," cried Ratty, "it's me, and my friend Mole, and we've lost our way in the snow."
Ratty, my dear little man, come along in, both of you at once. Why, you must be perished. Well, I never. Lost in the snow, and in the wild wood too, and this time of night? Come in with you both.
And heard the door shut behind them with great joy and relief. He looked kindly down on them, and patted both their heads.
This is not the time of night for small animals to be out. Come along into the kitchen. There's a fire there, and supper and everything.
He shuffled on in front of them, carrying the light, and they followed him, down a long passage into a central hall, out of which they could dimly see other tunnel-like passages branching, passages mysterious and without apparent end. But there were doors in the hall as well. One of these Badger flung open, and at once they found themselves in the glow and warmth of a large fire-lit kitchen. The floor was well-worn red brick, and on the wide hearth burnt a fire of logs, between two attractive chimney corners tucked away into the wall. Rows of spotless plates winked from the shelves of the dresser at the far end of the room, and from the rafters overhead hung hams, bundles of dried herbs, nets of onions, and baskets of eggs. A couple of high-backed settles, facing each other on either side of the fire, gave further sitting accommodations for the socially disposed, or where 2 or 3 friends of simple tastes could sit about as they pleased, and eat and smoke and talk in comfort and contentment. When at last they were thoroughly toasted, the Badger summoned them to the table, where he had been busy laying a hearty supper for the wayward fellows. They had felt very hungry before, but when they saw the supper that was spread for them, it seemed only a question of what they should attack first, where it was all so attractive. The Badger sat in his armchair at the head of the table, and nodded gravely at intervals as the animals told their story. And he did not seem surprised or shocked at anything. The Mole began to feel very friendly towards him. When supper was finished, and each animal felt that his skin was now as tight as was decently safe, they gathered around the glowing embers of the great wood fire, and thought how jolly it was to be sitting up so late and so independent and so full.
Well, it's time we were all in bed, said the Badger, getting up and fetching flat candlesticks. Come along, you two, and I'll show you to your quarters. And take your time tomorrow morning. Breakfast at any hour you please.
He conducted the 2 animals to a long room that seemed half bedchamber and half loft. The Badger's winter stores, which were visible everywhere, took up half the room. Piles of apples, turnips, potatoes, baskets full of nuts, and jars of honey. But the 2 little white beds on the remainder of the floor looked soft and inviting, and the linen on them was clean and smelt beautifully of lavender. The Mole and Ratty, shaking off their garments in some 30 seconds, tumbled in between the crisp sheets with great joy and contentment. Refreshed, the 2 animals came down to breakfast very late the next morning, and found a bright fire burning in the kitchen. Ratty cut himself some rashers from a side of bacon, while the mole dropped some eggs into a saucepan. Badger, who had eaten a hearty breakfast, had retired to his study and settled himself in an armchair with his legs up on another and a red cotton handkerchief over his face. He was being busy in the usual way at this time of year. The front doorbell clanged loudly, and the mole, who was very greasy with buttered toast, answered the door. And presently the mole returned with the good fellow Otter, who threw himself on Ratty with an embrace and a shout of affectionate greeting. "Otter!" spluttered Ratty with his mouth full. "Thought I should find you here all right," said the Otter cheerfully. "They were all in a great state of alarm along the river bank when I arrived this morning. Ratty had not been home all night, and neither had Mole. Something dreadful must have happened, they said, and the snow covered up all your tracks, of course. But I knew that when people were in any sort of fix, they mostly went to Badger. So I came straight here, coming through the snow as the red sun was rising and showing against the black tree trunks. Snow castles and snow caverns had sprung up out of nowhere in the night. Here and there great branches had been torn away by the sheer weight of the snow. I came upon a rabbit sitting on a stump, cleaning his silly face with his paws. He was a pretty scared animal when I crept up behind him and placed a heavy forepaw on his shoulder. I had to cuff his head once or twice to get any sense out of it at all. But at last I managed to extract from him that the mole had been seen in the wild wood last night by one of them. Oh, it was the talk of the burrows, he said, how Mole, Ratty's particular friend, was in a bad fix, and how he had lost his way. A plate of fried ham had just been cleared and sent back for more when the Badger entered. He greeted them all in his quiet, simple way, with kind inquiries for everyone, and presently they all sat down to luncheon together. The Mole found himself placed next to Mr. Badger, and as the other two were still deep in river gossip from which nothing could divert them, he took the opportunity to tell Mr. Badger how comfortable and homelike it all felt to him. The Badger simply beamed at him. "When lunch is over," he said, "I'll take you all around this little place of mine." After luncheon, accordingly, when the other two had settled themselves into the chimney corner and had started a heated argument on the subject of eels, the Badger lighted a lantern and bade the Mole to follow him. Crossing the hall, they passed down one of the principal tunnels, and the wavering light of the lantern gave glimpses on either side of rooms both large and small. When they got back to the kitchen again, they found Ratty walking up and down, very restless. The underground atmosphere was oppressing him, and he seemed really to be afraid that the river would run away if he wasn't there to look after it. So he had his overcoat on, and his pistols thrust into his belt again. "Come along, Mole," he said anxiously as soon as he caught sight of them. "We must get off while it's daylight. I don't want to spend another night in the wild wood again." "It'll be all right, my fine fellow," said the Otter. "I'm coming along with you, and I know every path blindfold. And if there's a head that needs to be punched, you can confidently rely on me to punch it." "You really needn't fret, Ratty," added the Badger. "My passages run further than you think, and I've got bolt holes to the edge of the wood in several directions." So the Badger, taking up his lantern again, led the way along a damp and airless tunnel. At last daylight began to show itself through tangled growth overhanging the mouth of the passage, and the Badger, bidding them a hasty goodbye, pushed them hurriedly through the opening and retreated.